Turn it on. The aircraft brake scandal is kind of an organizational case study, but it does kind of illustrate a lot of the issues with groups and teams, and how groupthink can result in foolish decisions such as selling a brake and that's faulty. Uh, but the issue there was in part organizational politics, whereas I think in groups, politics often plays a role, but uh, groupthink can be less a matter of politics and more of a cognitive nature, but they often overlap. I mean, the problems with groups can be a common, I think the political aspects are often overlapping. You see this in the Vietnam War, when we watch The Fog of War with Robert McNamara. It's a great interview, and basically different people have written about the Vietnam War, alternatively say, well, it was a strategic mistake, or it was due to cognitive limitations, bounded rationality, the fog of war. This is what McNamara claims. He says in the movie that we didn't understand the history, but you got to say, like, given the amount of money the U.S. spends on foreign policy expertise, how on earth could they not have known the history? I mean, that seems astonishing. Or it could have been just plain stupidity, incompetence. It could have been a lot of things, but basically, one of the most famous books written about it was by Irving Janis, entitled Groupthink. And groupthink refers to a tendency of groups to conform groupthink. And the book of the same title by Irving Janis um, goes into not just the Vietnam War, but a number of decisions made during the days of the Kennedy administration 60 years ago in the early 60s. And basically, Janice talks a little bit about the Bay of Pigs invasion, and that was one of the stupidest government decisions. I mean, government rarely fails from stupidity. That's been my feeling in my life. But basically, the Bay of Pigs invasion was among the dumbest of the dumb. And, I think part of what he's talking about is like, how is it like the Kennedy administration was famous at the time for having hired the smartest people into the cabinet, not just McNamara, but Dean Rusk, and there was a whole long list of them. McGeorge Bundy. There was a whole long list of them from Harvard and Yale, and these are supposed to be the smartest people available, and they made a number of jackass, stupid decisions, including the Vietnam War, but more so the Bay of Pigs invasion. I mean, they were both ridiculous, and I think what Janice is looking at in his book Groupthink is like, how is it that like these really smart people end up making such dumb decisions? And I think a big part of it, and this is like very useful from an organizational standpoint, is that group processes will often result in pressures to conform. And this idea of groupthink is that conformity pressure overcomes the advantages that accrue from a group. So we'll be talking a little bit about that today. But first, I want to take attendance. And before that, I just want to briefly discuss current events. The Fed meeting is 2 or 2:30 today. I forget which one. And basically, they're going to decide whether to raise interest rates or not. They've been doing this for a year, and it's always big news. But this time, it's, I think, the most important one because we're starting to see the cracks in the financial system. As you know, I've mentioned, and I'm sure you know on your own, that there are a number of recent bank failures, including Silicon Valley Bank, which was the 16th largest bank. I mistakenly said it's somewhere the 60th, the 16th largest bank. And uh, also Signature Bank, and just the other day, Credit Suisse was about to fail and was rescued by the Swiss National Bank, and now has been bought out by UBS, which is also a Swiss bank. And Republic Bank almost failed and was bailed out by a bunch of other banks, led by JP Morgan. And so basically, the banking system is fundamental to the economy. And if you study the history of the Great Depression that began in 1930 or so, everyone knows it followed the stock market crash of 29, which was an important event. But more important than that was the failure of several banks, including the Bank of the United States, based in New York City. And these bank failures led to a tightening of lending, which in turn leads to a recession, or the depression. And so basically, this problem is one that is of grave concern, to not just to the Fed, but to the general public. And of course, part of the Fed's mission is to make sure that the banks don't fail. So, in his book in the 1960s, there were two books: The Monetary History of the United States and Capitalism and Freedom, which the second one is a quick read, and I recommend it. It's a very interesting book by Milton Friedman, and it's meant to be read by the general public. It's not a specialist book or anything. And basically, he argues that the Fed completely failed by allowing the banks in 1931 to collapse. And the thing is, if the Fed does that now, it could lead to a major recession. On the other hand, if they don't raise interest rates, there's going to be continued inflation. So there's like a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, if you raise interest rates, there'll be more stress on the economy. If you don't raise interest rates, you're kind of admitting that inflation will defeat you. So basically, there are a lot of people who are critical of Powell for raising rates, and it's easy to be so because unemployment results from raising interest rates. On the other hand, if you compare the U.S. and Sweden, the Swedish unemployment rate now is over 7%. The U.S. unemployment rate now is 3.6%. So we've got half the unemployment rate of Sweden. I mentioned Sweden because the students seem to, I keep getting students who think that Sweden is some kind of utopia. It's not, believe me. You have much less job opportunity there than you do, and much less ability to start a small business. But basically, because unemployment is already historically relatively low, uh, I don't quite get what the emotional reaction is to somewhat of an increase in unemployment. Um, whereas if they don't address inflation, there's going to be a real, it's going to be a long-term problem. And so I think, we're going to see what happens. No one knows what they're going to do. So if they decide to so-called pivot and get away from raising interest rates, you're going to see the stock market take off like crazy. And the critics now, Elizabeth Warren, the senator, was highly critical, as have been a lot of Wall Street people. I subscribe to a stock advisor named Louis Navalier, who he's been complaining about the interest rates. He's a perma bull. He's been complaining about the interest rates all along, and Wall Street hates higher rates because it causes stocks to fall. Left The left doesn't like higher rates because it causes higher unemployment and it makes government spending more difficult. They can't they can't, well, they can tax more, but they can't spend as much because borrowing is more difficult. So, raising rates curtails the ability of the state to implement new policies, new programs, because the interest rates are higher. It's harder to borrow. Uh, so you have an alliance basically of the left and Wall Street wanting lower rates. On the other hand, if they don't keep increasing the rates or reduce them, then you're going to see higher prices at the pump, at the gas pump, at the supermarket, buying a car, whatever. You will, if they don't address inflation now, there's going to be permanent, inflation. In the early 80s, there was a similar situation, and Paul Volcker, who eventually did raise rates to a terribly high level in order to stop the inflation then, which was worse than now. Uh, when he was midway through, he was subjected to the same kind of condemnation that Powell is experiencing from Elizabeth Warren and other people. And Volcker capitulated and started to lower rates, and then inflation really took off. And sometimes it's called the Volcker mistake. And he realized that he had screwed up. He listened to the idiots, and he screwed up. And basically, and the same could be said about being overly obeisant to Wall Street's wants. The Wall Street people, always want lower rates. It's always true. And so you've got this alliance of ever lower rates, and it makes people feel good, but then in the end, it results in the situation we have now. And if they don't address it, it'll become more extreme. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't claim to have a crystal ball. The stock market right now, I was just looking at it, is steady. So no, but everybody's waiting to see what happens. If they pivot, so-called pivot, and start reducing rates or not raising them, the market will take off. If they say 0.5 increase, the market will fall. If they say 0.25, it'll probably be about what people expect, and you won't see a lot of change. But a lot then depends on what they say. So we'll see what happens. And if they keep raising it, there could be a severe recession. That's the reality. If they decide not to raise it, you're going to see, we'll probably see higher prices in the coming years. Declining living standards as wages don't necessarily keep pace with inflation. Okay, so basically, I will start with attendance. Farhad,
I'm here.
hello. Ahmed, Alcor, Mohammed Athi, Jenna Bell,
Here.
hello. Joseph Catanzaro, Jiamin Chen,
I'm here.
hello. Janine
Oh,
Cola,
Professor, it's Joseph.
who is this?
Wait, oh, sorry, Professor, it's Joseph. I'm here. My thing wouldn't unmute.
Okay,
Joseph,
no problem.
I'm here. My
Gotcha.
phone wouldn't unmute.
Okay, Joseph. Janine, I'm sorry, Camilla Cyrus,
I'm here, Professor.
hello, Camilla. David Esterovsky,
I'm here, Professor.
hello. Marimar Garcia, Monica, Alexia Harrigan,
I'm here.
hello. Kani Zhang,
Here.
hello, Kani. Yusuf Kahan, Georgie Karim Lishvili,
I'm here.
hello. Summer Lamb,
Here.
hello. Hongjian Lin,
Here.
hello. Hamdi,
Here.
hello. Ludley,
Here.
hello. Famita Patwari,
Here.
hello. Emmanuel Plamakis,
Hello.
hello. Raquel Porteous,
Good morning, Professor. I'm here.
good morning. Ji Shan Ruan, Brendan Samuel,
Here, Professor. Morning.
hello, Brendan. Aaliyah Todd,
I'm here, Professor.
hello. Stacy Ergiles,
I'm here. Good morning.
good morning. Denasia Warner,
Here.
hello. Jack,
Here.
hello. Yayin Zhang,
I'm here.
hello. Yixuan Zhang,
I'm here.
hello. Matthew Zhao,
Here.
hello. Taryn Sander,
Here.
hello. Christian Mendez,
Here, Professor. Good morning.
hello, Christian. Janaya Pratt,
Here.
hello. Alexander Betts, Jack Shrem,
Here, Professor.
hello. Okay, I'm going to call the people that didn't answer the first time. If you're here, let me know. Ahmed Alcor,
I'm here.
hello. Mohammed Afi, Janine Cola, Madi
Professor,
Yes.
Mohammed said he's in the waiting room.
Okay, I see. Marimar Garcia, Monica Garcia, Yusuf Khan, Jishan Rowan, and Alexander Betts. Okay, because all those people would be missing. So I got 32.
Wait, Professor, I don't know if you called my name, but I'm here.
Okay, gotcha.
This is Mohammed, by the way.
I see. Okay, thank you. All right. So let's continue talking a little bit about groups and teams. Last time I think I was just getting started talking about the Solomon Asch and the Milgram experiments, and these are fairly strong. It's not just that they're evidence of groupthink. Oh, people are saying they're going to pivot. I don't know. We'll see. to me, it's like reading tea leaves. Everyone's like saying they said this word and that word, and we'll see what they actually do. But 10 to 1, whatever they do, the market's going to move at least a couple of 100 points either way. So unless they say 0.25, I think that's what a lot of people are expecting. In that case, I'm not so sure. But basically, this idea of groupthink, and I mean, in any group, including the Federal Open Market Committee meeting that decides the interest rates, there's always going to be this kind of group process. And some people are going to conform, and other people are going to have strong views, and there'll be conflict, and who gets to be the decider, and eventually the group makes the decision. So basically, let me just review what I was talking about last time. I think I said that groups have purposes. It's two or more individuals who are interdependent. The group decision-making process and groups include norms, roles, statuses of individuals, group dynamics, cohesion, how much they stick together. Individuals often identify with groups, and social identity theory suggests that self-esteem gets tied to the group and people want to join it. We connect with others because of our roles, and then our roles lead us to adjust our expectations. They're always in groups and out groups. The more powerful ones are the in groups. I talked about the punctuated equilibrium model and the alternative model of forming, storming, norming, and performing. And I talked a little bit about psychological contracts. I should say a little more about that. If you look at the way companies used to be run, the way big companies used to be run back in the olden days, in the 1970s and earlier, say between the post-war period and the 1980s, say. So if an employee, so this is pay, the y-axis is pay, and the x-axis is like time, let's call it time in a career. So it starts out that, okay, well, let me put it this way. This is the market rate. Okay, so whatever it is, this is the going rate for a given type of job. So it starts out that when the firm hires somebody, in the case of in other words, this is a model of psychological contracts in big firms. And you could also call this the way internal labor markets are set up. That it starts out that the employees paid below the market rate because the firm is making an investment. And in this early period, the employee is learning firm-specific skills that they can use later in their career. So they don't have them yet, and the firm says, well, if you start out, we'll pay you below the market rate, and we'll teach you the firm-specific skills, how the company politics, how the firm works, and stuff like that. Over time, we'll then raise you above the market rate, and you'll get at least a better return than the average person earns over their lifetime. So the idea, and this existed in a lot of big firms such as IBM and AT&T, that they would hire you at a relatively modest salary, and then you would boost your way up. And over time, you would then earn above the market rate as you learn the firm-specific skills. firm-specific skills could be task-related or could be office politics, whatever. And what then happened in the 1980s and 1990s is the firms ended it. So they fired a lot of people. IBM fired a large share of people, and they all didn't recoup, that learning curve. I don't know if it's true that they didn't recoup it in theory, but they didn't. But in reality, IBM was a high-paying firm, so they may have more than recouped it anyway. But the thing is that exists to a much lesser degree now. And that's where your gig economy comes into play increasingly, because you don't have these psychological contracts. There might be other kinds of psychological contracts. So, the old model may have been replaced by a new model where you're expected to behave in certain ways, but with the gig economy, I think there's much less room for psychological contracts than existed in the heyday of corporate America. All right, so basically, all groups have norms, and norms lead to establishing standards of behavior. Norms are, by definition, standards of behavior shared by group members. And because people seek acceptance, there's strong pressure to conform to the group. Basically, you could say that there's something called group shift. And I think this is a very useful concept, but it's kind of buried in the chapter. And the idea of group shift, I've witnessed this many, many times in my life, is that a group adopts a given norm, and basically the norm becomes a reference point for the people in the group. And then, like, there are people in the group that want a virtue signal. And so they adopt the norm to a much greater degree than they would have anyway. And so the establishment of a norm creates an incentive in some people's minds to become more extreme. And so when you establish group norms, it almost always establishes this kind of extremism that people are going to outshine each other with respect to orthodoxy. And you see this in politics a great deal. So the establishment of a group norm can lead to all kinds of absurd behaviors, and it often does. And this is why groups have both assets and liabilities. And one of the chief liabilities, I'll briefly, I talk about this in my 3200 class also, but I think it's very useful that there are assets, and this guy Norman Meyer wrote this piece back in the 60s, Assets and Liabilities. Your book talks about this as well. So the assets, you have a little balance sheet here. The assets are, number one, that the group provides more information. So you have people with different backgrounds, different points of view, different problem-solving approaches. And also you have more problem-solving algorithms. So for instance, people might come from marketing, they might come from computer science, they might come from personnel, HR. And so all of these people have different approaches to solving problems. And so the group can become more creative and come up with more ideas and more ways to solve the problem. It also checks dumb mistakes. Okay, somebody has a lapse of memory, they do something wrong, somebody will catch it if the group is paying attention. A group also, if you include everyone in the who's affected by the decision, the groups will enhance commitment. So in other words, if you're involved in a decision, you'll be more likely to support that decision. However, groups also have liabilities that wash away a lot of the assets. And this is where you get to groupthink and conformity. So first of all, conformity pressure. If everyone conforms, then all the advantages of more information and more problem solving algorithms, those advantages disappear because of the conformity pressure. And number two, dominant individuals can squash ideation, can squash new ideas from appearing. So somebody says, this is how it should be. And, they argue with anyone who disagrees and they become the one that decides. And so that drives out the information from the group. As well, I think this idea of group shift can also be problematic, that the group can start to take on more risk or do things that are more extreme. There's a great book, and I have to say Meyer doesn't talk about group shift, but I think it's a good point. There's a great book, by the way, written in the 19th century by Charles Mackay called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And he talks about how crowds and will take on this kind of hysteria. And extraordinary popular delusions include stuff like the Salem witch hunts, where people are blamed for things unfairly. And the people who conducted it were virtue signaling. This is characteristic of virtue signaling. Like, oh, we're going to fire anyone who disagrees with this because they are a threat. Anyone who disagrees with our principles is going to be fired or is going to be humiliated, and so basically you get this a lot in democracies, but you also get it in organizations. So, he wrote this, it was like 150, 160 years ago. And basically, there was an update to it 30 years ago or so by Kindleberger called Panics, Manias, and Crashes. And basically, both books talk about, McKay talks about tulip mania. Markets are susceptible to this, but organizations are too. So basically, people take on more extreme views or take greater risks. And the end result is organizations do dumb things. So basically, this problem of conformity was illustrated by, I'm getting back on the screen share, by Solomon Asch in this famous study he did in the 1950s. And he was associated with another guy who ended up working at CUNY named David Milgram. And the two of them did these wonderful theatrical studies that have come under very serious criticism because they made use of human subjects without informing them. But I mean, if you inform them, they couldn't have done the study. So, if you become more concerned with that, then you can't do as many studies. And that's what happened. The people became more concerned with the human subjects, and then, the studies became somewhat less creative. So, but in any case, what Ash did, okay, so I'll start with Ash. He would show a card. Okay, so the idea was he had, let's say, a team of say 15 people, and the 16th they would run an ad and they'd get a 16th person. The 16th person would think that all 15 people were part of the experiment, so that all 15 people were like the one that was recruited from outside and were being subjected to the experiment, and they all seemed the same. So the test subject had no idea that actually 15 of the 16 were fooling the one. The one was a patsy, if you will. So basically, he would show 3 lines, and one of the lines would be shorter, and then he'd go around the room. This is supposed to be a C, which I botched. If you go around, he would go around the room and say which line is shorter, and it would start out that everybody would say A is shorter, but then as he would shift the lines around, the order and everything, and so in the first few times they would give the right answer, and then they would start to give the wrong answer, and everybody gave the wrong answer, and then what they wanted to know was whether the test subject would give the right answer or the wrong answer. All right, and clearly it's not a hard thing, but something like 30% would give the wrong answer. Now, to put that in perspective, most of the time we're not in groups with strangers. Most of the time we're in groups with people we know that are talking about ideas that are well established. And so the pressure to conform is far, far greater than in this experiment. So if you got 30%, in a group with strangers, the real answer is a lot bigger. So there's no doubt that, he showed pretty well that we are subject intensively to conformity pressure, and this has a lot to do with the quality of group decision making. Now, if you accept his colleague, David Milgram, took this a step further. He wrote a book based on his experiments called Obedience to Authority, which is a wonderful book, and he talks a lot about the different modes in which he did the experiment, the different ways he did it, and how it affected the responses. But the underlying point is that no matter how he did it, at least 30% of the test subjects were obedient to authority and were willing to kill somebody rather than disobey authority. So basically, the way he did it is that he ran an ad in Connecticut, and he did a lot of the experiments in Bridgeport, and he ran an ad for participants in the staff of an experimental study where they would be administrators in the study. He didn't tell them that they were actually the test subjects. He told them that they were the experimenters. They were led to believe that an actor was the test subject, when in fact the actor was a confederate of Milgram. So he fooled them, basically. And he said to them, he said to the test subjects, we're doing a study of pain, effects of pain on learning. And he had this fake electric chair, and it wasn't attached to the electricity, but he had a rod that was attached, and he would shock the test subject so that they would feel what an electric shock felt like. So they knew that there was real pain, but in fact, the chair wasn't really causing the actor any pain, but the actor pretended it was. And so he rigged up this thing that had sort of, it would give the number of volts, And then at the end, it had XXX. Oh, no, at the end, it had first danger. It said danger. Oh, God. I have trouble writing with this. At the end, it had danger. And then at the end, XXX. Okay, so what he would do is they give a question to the test subject, to the actor who's pretending to be the test subject. And the person would get it right a couple of times, and then they get it wrong, and they tell them to give a voltage shock, and then they get it wrong and they said raise the voltage. And so they would raise the voltage, and the actor would start at a certain point start to scream and froth at the mouth, and they were giving a convincing performance. And the what they found was that at least a third of the depending on how they did it, up to 60% of the test subjects would go past danger into XXX, where the actor would pretend to die. Okay, so basically, what this showed was that people are willing to do horrific things in order to obey authority. All right, and so basically, norms are extremely powerful. Political power is extremely powerful. Because people seek acceptance, they obey norms, and because people want to show that they obey authority and are proud of it, they will also commit crimes in the interest of political correctness or rectitude, or what they see is the right thing to do. So basically, organizational norms are extremely powerful. And they intersect with cultural norms, of course. So the cultures of an organization in one country are going to be something different from cultures of organizations in other countries. They're going to differ. I once worked for a Canadian corporation, and there were endless fights. They had a big British unit, and they were always bickering. So the cultures are going to be a little different, and things are going to change across countries. The status of people in groups will affect how they behave in groups. High status individuals are more likely to deviate from norms when they have low identification of the groups, and they tend to be better able to resist conformity pressure. I think the ultimate example of this, okay, there's people in the waiting room, I see that, was, where's the, looking for the, waiting room. Never to the waiting room. Over here. Okay. Okay, so basically, Henry David Thoreau came from an upper class, by American standards, upper class at that time, family. His father owned a factory, and he was famous because he chose to drop out of society. He was like the first hippie, and he wrote a book called Walden, about how he left Concord and moved a few miles away and lived in the woods and rejected authority. And then he wrote another influential book called Civil Disobedience. And he talked about that people should not accept the authority of the state and should reject the state if it commits crimes. And if everybody does that, the state won't commit crimes. And he was a model for various things that occurred in the 20th century, such as Mahatma Gandhi's battle with the English imperialism, and also Martin Luther King and James Farmer. If you see the movie The Great Debaters, it's kind of a fictionalized version of the story of James Farmer and the founding of the I think it was CORE. Was it CORE? The Congress of Racial Equality, I think it was called. Farmer organization. And so basically, Congress of Racial Equality, yeah. And so basically, this idea like, if you're high status, you don't give a darn about what other people think. I think that's not, you can adopt that, anyone can adopt that point of view. I think the reason that high status people tend to think that way is that they're satisfied with their position in the world. They don't feel threatened. I think the reason a lot of people worry a lot about what other people think is that they're insecure. And so if you feel more secure, you're going to be able to reject the opinions of society. There's no reason why you can't do that, and why anybody can't do that if you're not high, whether you're high status or low status or mid status, doesn't really matter. But basically, a lot of people in the world want to attain higher status, and so they behave in ways that they think will enhance their status. And this will be things like using pretentious jargon, doing favors for powerful people, trying to show that they're smarter, criticizing, giving more advice, things like that, that will maybe in their minds enhance their status. The size of a group is an important factor. Groups with a lot of members are going to get diverse input, but they're harder to manage. When I worked for the state assembly, I once went up in the elevator with one of the assembly people, and he said to me, back to Alice in Wonderland, like that was his perception of the state assembly. That, in other words, a large group like that comes up with a lot of ideas, but it's often difficult to get anything done. So basically, for idea generation, large groups are better, but smaller groups are more trustworthy and probably more effective. I was talking about this film I saw last night. I think the title is Inventing David Geffen, about the rock promoter David Geffen. It's a fascinating story. They don't mention it in the film. He had attended Brooklyn College for a year. I don't think he ever graduated. He was one of these many people that these entrepreneurs, these super entrepreneurs, often don't adjust to school. And one of the interesting things about him is, like, you can kind of see like the balance between his membership in groups and his individuality. And he was clearly highly individual. And his great strength was his negotiation skill. And he was successful in all the entertainment industries, even live theater on Broadway, but also, of course, rock, and as well movies. I didn't know he had produced Risky Business, a classic Tom Cruise movie, among many others. And then he was involved in the founding of DreamWorks. And what you could see in Geffen is this incredible individuality. He was completely, completely unique. But at the same time, he got things done largely by working in groups. And so a big part of the reason why he became so successful was that he was the same age and the same viewpoint as a lot of the rock musicians early in his career around 1970. And so, he picked up Laura Nyro, and he did everything he could for her. And she was his first client. He basically lived to help her, and he got this reputation. And, he moved to Laurel Canyon, Sunset Boulevard in LA. And, he was hanging out with these people, and they liked him because he was like them, but they realized that he had a skill that they didn't have, and Crosby of Crosby, Stills and Nash says, we wanted him to be our manager because we needed a shark. We knew we couldn't do what he could do, which was like serve as this negotiator and deal with the record companies and make sure that they were treated well. And he had this concept that he was going to treat the artists better than anybody else. And when he founded a record company, he called it Asylum Records, because the company would be an asylum for the artists. And so basically doing this, he was able to develop a huge network of clients who went to him because they expected better treatment and because they liked him. And so you can see in this the role of conformity, but you can also see in this that he functioned in a very individual way, and his greatness was that he knew not to become like the people he was representing. He retained his individuality. And so this enabled him to continually reinvent himself. And he became a billionaire. He's probably the most successful entertainment promoter. Steven Spielberg is up there also. The two of them are both on the Forbes list, I believe. But basically, the way that groups function is that you can benefit tremendously from them, but there are many things that they don't do as well as an individual does. And so you have to know where to draw the line. You see this in Geffen's career. He did it repeatedly. He'd be part of a group, then he'd reject it, not reject it, but maybe sell them out in effect. Like he eventually sold Asylum Records to corporate America, and one of the groups he formed was the Eagles, which became like one of the biggest groups of all time. And he basically sold this whole thing to corporate America. And the artists he had told had an asylum learned that they didn't have an asylum, that they were now part of Atlantic Records. And so but he was willing to do that because he needed to reinvent himself and move on to the next project. So basically, groups have uses, and they have huge advantages, but they also have huge disadvantages as well. One of these is social loafing, the tendency for individuals to expend less effort when working collectively. Some people join the class and then walk away from the microphone, let other people do the work. Social loafing is inversely related to conscientiousness and to work ethic. So people who do that are not the ones I would invest in, okay? Because these kind of habits lead to self-indulgence, which in turn leads to failure. To avoid social loafing, groups should have clear goals. Intergroup competition is helpful. Peer evaluation is helpful. People who are highly motivated will not engage in social loafing, obviously. And rewards should be based on unique contributions. Cohesion is also an important factor. The group acts as a unit if they spend time together, they have a history, they face external threats, and the group is small. Groups, you want the group to be cohesive if you're trying to accomplish objectives, if you need to work together. If you're working on a task that requires dependent roles, there will be more cohesion. The idea of group decision-making is that two heads are better than one. And I already discussed the strengths and weaknesses of group decision-making. More information, increased diversity of views, increased acceptance. These are the strengths. Liabilities include time, conformity, pressure, dominance by an individual, and diffuse responsibility, which leads to social loafing. So group decision makings results in more accurate decisions than average, but less accurate than the best individual. So someone like Geffen will not benefit from working in a group, but his partner will benefit. In fact, there's a section of the film I'm talking about a film I just saw about David Geffen, who where his partner, he wants a guy to work with him, and the guy was managing I think it was Graham Nash, and he said the guy said to him, "Why should I work with you? I'm already successful." And he said, "There's a very simple reason. If you work with me, you'll make a lot more money than you will." And it was true. It happened. And so basically they formed Crosby, Stills and Nash, which led to like one of the biggest groups of all time, which pushed Geffen further on his career. The disadvantages, of course, are the liabilities, time, pressure, conformity pressure. We talked about dominance. We talked about and diffuse responsibility. Okay, now how do you improve group decision making? Well, I think a key way is to figure out how to eliminate conformity pressure. And one way to do this is brainstorming, which focuses on generating alternative views, creating more fluent ideas and more flexible, more divergent ideas and more of them. And the idea of brainstorming is that you get a group together and then you don't criticize each other's ideas. You spit out ideas, you build on each other's ideas, and you try to generate excitement and creativity around the sharing of ideas. Some of the ideas are going to be crazy, but you don't criticize them, because the idea is that the best ideas are often the craziest ideas. And so if you look at the history of business, ideas that turned out to be the most successful are ones that people said wouldn't work or said were stupid. So Tesla's model of AC electrical generation, the AC electric system, when he told his professor in Europe about this idea, the professor said, alternating current is nonsense, a perpetual motion scheme. And his vision enabled him to kind of overcome what seemed to be these self-contradictory or impossible aspects of the idea. And if you look at a lot of the great business ideas, they often have that quality. And that's why groups are not good for the most extreme kinds of creativity. Because the creativity often involves breaking through apparent contradictions. Like Einstein's insight that a straight line is not the shortest distance between 2 points. If you said that to a group, they would immediately reject it. And Tesla's ideas were fought aggressively by Edison and by other physicists who thought they were ridiculous until he showed they could work perfectly well. So this groupthink had both political sides and conformity pressure. And the end result is that you have to overcome this. To be somebody like David Geffen or Nikola Tesla, you have to overcome this immense pressure. And it's very, very hard to do. That's why these people are often not able to function in school, because they're not organizational people. They're people who go outside norms. And that's very difficult to do. And school doesn't teach that. All right, so there are different kinds of teams. I should mention also nominal group technique and also the Delphi technique. In the nominal group technique, members record ideas. Each member presents one idea. No discussion takes place until all ideas are presented, and the group discusses and evaluates ideas. This can be done without revealing who's coming up with the ideas. That's probably a good idea because that eliminates hierarchy, it eliminates conformity pressure, and so opens up the group to more ideas. Work groups interact to share information, whereas work teams generate synergy. Types of teams include problem-solving teams that meet regularly to discuss ideas like quality standards, self-managed work teams, which involves a team of employees who autonomously implement solutions and take responsibility, cross-functional teams, which are made up of individuals from different work areas and have ambiguous leadership. Virtual teams use technology. Multi-team systems involve 2 or more interdependent teams that share a superordinate goal. Virtual meetings have become more and more prevalent. There's a lot of advantages to remote work. It doesn't affect productivity. If the groups meet 25% of the time virtually, or people work at home 25% of the time virtually, it doesn't affect productivity. And so it's a good alternative that's become increasingly popular, as we see with this class. A lot of factors other than group structure and group processes. So group processes would include things like the decision-making process, the punctuated equilibrium, or the alternative norming, forming, storming, and performing. The group structure would include things like roles, status, size of the group, norms. So the context of a group or a team has to do with, are there adequate resources? Is the culture of the group supportive, or the culture of the organization supportive of the group? What kind of performance evaluation is done? One of the things years ago, I visited Merck, the pharmaceutical company, and yeah, Brendan says the guys at BF Goodrich lack the important factors that would help group performance, and that's absolutely true. I mean, basically, they allowed the political and groupthink factors to overwhelm them, and the result is a dumb decision. Really well-managed firms would not have penalized Van Devere and his friend, that in a well managed firm, deviant behavior can be supported, although any firm will put a lot of weight on conformity to group norms and to conformity to the culture. But in well managed firms, conformity to the culture doesn't necessarily mean not being allowed to protest a bad decision. So like at J&J, the organizational culture is very strong and people fit in. But if somebody who brings up a shortcoming won't be penalized, okay, if you adhere to the culture. Okay, but that's the thing. And so you have to understand the culture, and then you can be a participant and make a contribution. But I mean, a lot of the group decision making, a lot of what you should think about in group decision making is really, how do I convince a group not to make a bad decision or to make a good decision? And basically, the basic principle is that you have to use the norms of the group to frame an alternative course of action. Okay, it's basically, if you can understand what people's norms are, what they've accepted as norms, and you can use those norms to get them to change a decision if you show that the alternative decision is more congruent with the norms. So basically, if you have a debate about equality and you say, well, in our nation, all men are created equal, and you say, we believe in equality. Why aren't you conforming to this belief system that convinces people to accept an alternative view because it's more congruent with equality? So basically, if you can bring people in a company around, and I think where the aircraft brake scandal people failed was that they weren't able to use the group norms to convince the other ones to change. And probably part of it was that they didn't have the political power, but often you can overcome that if you utilize the norms and bring them up to the boss in a friendly way. So anyway, the context of teams is very important. Things like the composition of the team and the abilities of the members, how roles are allocated, how diverse the team is, the size. Also, to what degree does the team share common purposes? To what degree does the team have fitting motivation? To what degree is the team effective? What are some of the roles that people play in teams? This is kind of an interesting thing. If you look at a team, there's often a wide range of roles. Like, roles are things that people perceive themselves as being good at, or that's part of what they should be doing in a group. And it could include things like being the leader, or being a change agent, or it could be an enforcer of the group norms. This is characteristic of groupthink, incidentally. One of the things that Irving Janis noticed when he spoke, Arthur Schlesinger, who was a historian at CUNY, was allowed to attend the cabinet meetings of the Kennedy administration. And when he interviewed Schlesinger, Janis interviewed Schlesinger about what went on. And one of the things was that he said that when he was amazed at what they were talking about and using civilians to invading Cuba, and he raised a question, and somebody said, "Keep quiet. You don't want to distract the president." And so basically, like, there were these thought police who see their role as enforcing the norms, and this is characteristic of groupthink. And of course, when a group is subject to groupthink, they'll tend to make stupid decisions, and many groups do, without a doubt. I mean, there's no shortage of examples. The Cuban Missile Crisis and the Vietnam War being two of them, but not the Cuban Missile. I keep saying that. I meant to say the Bay of Pigs invasion. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a good decision. The Bay of Pigs invasion and the Vietnam War are two ones that weren't that smart. I think if you look at the history of American foreign policy in the last 50 years, there have been a lot of really stupid decisions, and a lot of them can be attributed to groupthink. So basically, but I mean, corporate America has the same problems. One of the classic ones was the decision to change the formula of Coca-Cola in the early 1980s. Coca-Cola had, for 100 years or something, had a formula, and part of the mystique of Coca-Cola was that they had this formula, and everybody bought Coca-Cola. In the 70s, the BBD&O advertising agency, I think it was, and Pepsi, whom they represented, started to do taste tests, and they found that people preferred the taste of Pepsi in a blind taste test. So they started advertising this, and Coke became upset. And so they changed the formula of Coke, and they had no idea of what the formula of Coke meant to the public. How they could not know this is puzzling. But again, it's, you get a group of really smart people together and they make some really dumb decisions. And so they changed the formula of Coke, and they announced this, that we now have a new Coke formula, and the public went ballistic. The people said, we're not going to drink it. You know, it was like a threat to their identity. The national pride was affected or something. And so basically, people just didn't drink Coke, and Coke sales fell to zero in a matter of weeks, and they reversed it. But basically, that kind of decision where they don't even know their own product is characteristic of groupthink. That said, we're just about out of time. I just realized 12:13. So basically, you know, I think the upshot of what I'm saying is that groups have both advantages and disadvantages. You need to play the game in groups. Groups can often help companies, but you also have to ask yourself, is this group really furthering what I think is right? And if you don't, you need to be able to adjust your performance in order to prod the group in a better direction. You can do this without threatening your career by addressing the norms of the group and showing that you're part of the norms, but that you want the group to think differently. Groups will often adopt extreme positions. Part of this is groupthink, part of it is group shift. The idea that groups encourage extreme thinking as people virtue signal and try to show that they've adopted the norms of the group. This in turn results in extremist behavior and excessive risk taking. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask. There's still a little time if you haven't done the discussion board yet. I won't be grading it until later. So have a nice week, and I'll get you the assignment for next week. And if you have any questions, please stick around and we can discuss them.
Hi, Professor. Sorry. I'm here, Monica Garcia. I
Okay.
don't know if you caught me.
Okay, Monica. Okie doke.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Oh, Professor, I have a quick question.
Yes.
It's off topic to class, but you said your favorite artist was Tim Buckley, but did you listen to Jeff Buckley at all? I think you said you did, right?
Oh, well, I don't think Tim Buckley was my favorite, but I used to listen to Tim Buckley when I was very young. He was a big folk rock guy,
Yeah,
and I used
a
to
lot of
listen
folk.
to his albums. Jeff Buckley, I brought up, I think, Tim Buckley. I forget where I mentioned Tim Buckley, but I recently watched a
I think you were playing one
movie.
of his songs.
Pardon?
I think you were playing one of his songs, and that's why you mentioned it. Like before class.
Could be, yeah. I was recently watching a movie about Leonard Cohen, the
Oh,
folk rock guy, and his song Hallelujah had an incredible evolution that went. The album was originally rejected by Columbia Records, and they released it
yeah.
on a small label. And one of the people that made it a major song was Jeff Buckley. You know, he popularized it, and it went through several iterations. After he popularized it, it became it was featured on Shrek, the movie, which in turn made it
Yeah,
into this huge
yeah.
song.
Well, yeah, Jeff Buckley's my like favorite artist of all time. So
Oh,
like when you
really?
mentioned the father, I was like, yeah, no, he's my favorite artist of all time. I mean, he only released one album when he was alive, and then the album and the songs released after his death. I mean, they're all fantastic. So like, yeah, he's just my favorite artist. And when you mentioned him, I was like, oh, nice. I have to remember to say something one day.
Yeah. I'll have to listen to. I haven't listened to his whole album. I know the version of Hallelujah that he did well, but I'll sit down and listen to it. Thanks for telling me about it.
Yeah, no, of course, it's the best album again in my opinion, the best album ever released. Like the song "Lover You Should Have Come Over" on that is just like a classic in my eyes. But yeah, no, and, I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you, John. That's great.
You got
Hey,
it. All right, bye,
Professor.
Professor.
Take care.
Hey,
Yes, you too.
Professor. I was here, but I was here since the beginning of class, but I was in the bathroom when you were taking attendance.
Okay, all right.
Sorry about that.
Okay, I gave you credit.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Brendan. If you're still here.
Yeah, Professor, I'm still here.
Yeah, the invasion of Grenada. Yeah, that was another one. Yeah. That I don't know. That was, to me, that was one of the more ridiculous things Reagan did. I just I never quite got it. Okay, Alexander, I got you. Are you from Grenada or something, Brendan? Or you know people?
Yeah, I was born there. I came here as a kid, but I was born in Grenada, and
What did you
I mean,
think of the
well,
invasion?
well, based on what I learned, like hearing stories from other people, my family and others who were young at the time. Uh, well, it was a crazy time for the country itself. But the fact that Ronald Reagan went in there and did what he did. But I'll just mention this part. When I was going through some like I was trying to do some research and stuff, and I saw that at the time uh, there was a lot of soldiers that was killed, uh, and I believe that Ronald Reagan actually used the Grenadian invasion to pivot, the American audience away from what really happened at that time. So
It was like a distraction.
yeah, And secondly, I mean, like you have a country right there in your backyard, who's like, friends with Cuba and stuff like that. So that right there is a big no-no. So I think that's another reason why he went, uh, why he sent the troops and got like other Caribbean islands to invade Grenada.
I see. So I don't know a lot about the details. So what other islands were involved in the invasion of Grenada?
So it was Barbados, and I believe Jamaica had a role in it too. And
So they were
um,
basically pandering to US interests by, doing us a favor, and in return, they would get something.
yeah,
later.
so what Ronald Reagan did, he went around and tell everyone in the Caribbean that, oh, there's there's a Grenada right there is actually they're building like I'm trying to like remember what I was told, but I don't have like concrete evidence. But it was basically saying he was basically saying that Grenada had they were building an airport, yeah, but within the airport there was like building submarines, like a place for submarines and like warfare stuff, artilleries, and they were teaming up with the Soviet Union, Russia, and Cuba.
And they'd pose
at
a
the time.
threat to the other
And
islands.
and yeah, so he basically, so he was like, hey, we can't allow that to happen. And he convinced, other islands to join to go and restore like peace in Grenada. Because the government at the time, like the prime minister died. Well, he didn't die, they murdered him. So after that happened, he decided like now is the time to step in because it looks like we're really helping them. But yeah, I just mentioned
Interesting.
it because I thought you knew about it. So I don't really
Yeah,
know
I
all
was
the
alive
details here.
then. I remember it. I don't remember the details.
Um,
That's very interesting story. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of had the feeling at the time that it was just a distraction. That was my impression. I don't know the details of Grenada's internal politics. So, what kind of government do they have now?
is democracy. Well, after the US had invaded, so they included like the democracy
So
government
things worked out
system.
okay. I mean, it's not like they're suffering or anything.
Yeah, things is better now. Things is better now. But at the time, like the country had became like one of the leading island to like flourish uh economic wise, and like it just like during the time when that prime minister, his name is Maurice Bishop, uh
Uh-huh.
he made the country a really successful country. And but before that, the country it wasn't as great. Like things was tough. But yeah, they killed him, and things got chaotic, and that's why one of the reasons why the US stepped in.
I see.
Yeah.
I was just in St. Lucia in January,
Wow. That's
which is
cool.
nearby.
That's pretty cool. What is it
Yeah,
like over there?
pardon?
What was it like over there?
St. Lucia, oh, I love it. It's like the Catskills, except sort of tropical. It was lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, I never been there, but yeah, I know the island you're talking about. It's right there.
Yeah,
It's like
I almost
neighboring.
killed myself climbing up a mountain, but that's another story. But yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful place. What's the land like in Grenada?
uh it's kind of like the Bahamas. Like there's a couple, it's mountainous, but it's also flat. Like it's nice over there actually.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I was thinking of going to the Bahamas.
Yeah.
also. I've been to Curacao. I've been planning to explore the Caribbean more next few
Yeah.
years.
I've been to the Bahamas twice. It's beautiful over there. It kind of reminds me of a little of like Miami in a way.
Yeah, it's nearby.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a ferry from Miami uh, to the Bahamas. I think to Nassau. I'm not sure where it goes exactly, but yeah, you can take a ferry there from Miami. You know, if you're in Miami, you can just spend a day there.
Yeah.
So
I,
yeah,
I had no idea. Anyways, I gotta go now.
yeah.
Have a good one.
Take care. Thanks for the
Thanks for
point.
class. All right, bye.
Bye now. Can anyone else have a question?